The late afternoon sun hung low over the Dakota Territory, casting long shadows across the rolling prairie. A lone rider moved deliberately along the dirt road leading from the town of Redemption, his weathered face half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Jedediah Caldwell sat tall in the saddle despite his 62 years, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, an old habit from days long past. The wind carried the scent of rain. Storm clouds gathered in the distance, their dark underbellies promising a downpour before nightfall. Jed estimated he'd reach Silverwood Ranch with time to spare. 5 years since Martha's passing, and still he found himself hurrying home to no one. The thought settled in his chest like a cold stone. The first gunshot cracked through the air like thunder. Jed's horse reared, and his hand instinctively reached for a weapon that hadn't been there for 10 years. A second shot echoed, followed by a woman's scream from beyond the bend in the road. "Whoa, easy," he murmured, steadying his mount. The horse snorted, ears pinned back in alarm. In another life, Jed would have drawn his revolver. In another life, he'd been Redemption Sheriff for 22 years, a decorated sharpshooter before that. Now he was just an aging rancher with arthritic hands and too many ghosts. But some instincts never fade. He guided his horse off the road into the cover of cottonwood trees and dismounted with practiced quiet. The horse's reins wrapped securely around a low branch. Jed crouched low, moving through the underbrush toward the sounds of struggle. His breath came slow and measured the breathing of a marksman. Beyond the bend, a stagecoach had been forced to stop. The driver slumped forward, dark blood staining his shirt. Two masked men were dragging a young woman from the coach while a third kept watch. The woman fought fiercely, her blonde hair coming loose from its pins as she struggled. "Get your filthy hands off me." Her voice carried across the distance, strong despite her predicament. One of the men struck her across the face. "Shut up! You're worth more if you're not damaged, but that don't mean we can't rough you up some." Jed assessed the situation with the cool detachment of his military days. 3 armed men, 1 hostage, no firearm of his own. The odds weren't favorable. Then the woman managed to free one arm and claw at her attacker's face, drawing blood. The man cursed viciously and raised his pistol. Jed moved without thinking. He grabbed a fist-sized rock and hurled it with remarkable accuracy, striking the gunman's hand. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ground. Before the other men could react, Jed charged from the trees, barreling into the nearest attacker with the force of a man 20 years younger. They tumbled to the ground. Jed's elbow connected with the man's temple, stunning him momentarily. Rolling to his feet, Jed faced the remaining 2. The woman used the distraction to break free, but as she ran, the third man fired. She cried out, clutching her side, but kept moving toward the trees. "She's hit! Get her!" the leader shouted. Jed grabbed the fallen man's pistol and fired a warning shot. "Back off!" The attackers hesitated, recognizing something in Jed's stance, the unwavering grip, the perfect positioning. This was no ordinary rancher. "This ain't your business, old man," the leader growled. "Made it my business," Jed replied, his voice deadly calm. The first man was recovering, reaching for a knife in his boot. Jed noticed the movement and shifted his aim slightly. "Don't." A tense moment passed, broken only by the woman's labored breathing as she staggered to the tree line. Finally, the leader nodded to his companions. "We're leaving, but this ain't over." His eyes narrowed beneath his mask. "You just made a powerful enemy." They mounted their horses and rode hard in the opposite direction, leaving their fallen companion's horse behind. Jed kept the pistol trained on them until they disappeared over a rise. Only then did he turn toward the trees where the young woman had fled. "Miss, I'm here to help. They're gone now." A rustling came from behind a large cottonwood. The woman emerged cautiously, one hand pressed to her side, blood seeping between her fingers. Her face was pale, but her blue eyes remained alert and wary. "How do I know you're not with them?" she demanded, though her voice wavered. Jed slowly set the pistol on the ground and raised his empty hands. "Name's Jedediah Caldwell. Got a ranch about 3 miles north. I can get you to safety, tend to that wound." She studied him, weighing her limited options. Finally, her shoulders slumped slightly. "I don't have much choice, do I?" "There's always a choice," Jed said quietly. "But I promise you'll be safe with me." Something in his steady gaze must have convinced her. She nodded once, then swayed dangerously. Jed moved quickly, catching her before she collapsed. "I've got you," he murmured, surprised at how light she felt in his arms. "What's your name, Miss Abigail?" she whispered. "Abigail Warren." Jed helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. He kept one arm securely around her waist, feeling the warm wetness of blood on his sleeve. Hold on, Miss Warren. Not far now. As they rode, the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Stay. Silverwood Ranch stood in a small valley protected by a ridge of pine-covered hills. The main house was solid, if unassuming, a two-story structure of weathered timber with a wide front porch. A barn and several outbuildings completed the homestead, all meticulously maintained, despite being run by a single aging man. By the time they arrived, the rain was coming down in sheets. Jed helped Abigail down from the horse, practically carrying her onto the porch. She was conscious but unnervingly quiet, her face ashen in the fading light. He kicked the door open and brought her inside, laying her gently on the sofa near the fireplace. Only then, in the warm lamplight, did he get a proper look at her. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 22 or 23. Her clothes, though travel-stained and now bloodied, were of good quality. But what struck him most were her eyes, alert, despite her pain, and calculating in a way that suggested she was used to dangerous situations. "Let me see that wound," he said, reaching for the buttons of her jacket. Her hands shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "No." Jed stepped back immediately. "I need to tend it, miss. I've got some medical experience." "I'll do it myself," she insisted. Just bring me what I need." He nodded, respecting her boundaries. Clean cloths in the kitchen cupboard. Bandages and medicines in the cabinet above the washstand. "I'll bring water to clean it." While she unbuttoned her jacket with trembling fingers, Jed gathered the supplies. He returned with a basin of warm water, bandages, and a bottle of whiskey. "For the pain," he explained, setting the items within her reach. Abigail's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "And disinfection." She took the bottle and poured some directly onto her wound, hissing through clenched teeth. Jed turned away to give her privacy, busying himself with lighting the fire. Behind him, he could hear her breathing sharply as she cleaned and dressed her injury. When he glanced back, he was surprised to see her binding the wound with practiced efficiency. "You've done that before," he observed. "I was training to be a nurse," she said quietly. "Before?" She didn't finish the thought, but tied off the bandage with a small, tight knot. The bullet had only grazed her side, painful but not life-threatening. She pulled her torn jacket closed, suddenly looking very young and vulnerable, despite her competence. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for saving my life." Jed nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "You hungry? Got some stew I can heat up." Before she could answer, he noticed her gaze fixed on something across the room. Following her line of sight, he saw she was staring at his old sheriff's badge, mounted in a small frame on the wall alongside a collection of photographs. The color drained from her face. You were a lawman." "Long time ago," Jed confirmed, watching her reaction carefully. "Retired 10 years back." Abigail's hand moved to her throat as if she couldn't get enough air. "I should go. In this storm, with that injury, that'd be foolish. You don't understand. The man who's after me, he's a lawman too." Her voice trembled. "Or at least that's what he claims to be." Jed's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. "What's his name?" "He calls himself Sebastian Voss." She watched Jed's face for any sign of recognition. "He hunts people, women mostly. Says it's all legal, that we're all fugitives or debtors." Jed moved to the window, pulling aside the curtain to peer into the rain-drenched darkness. "How'd you end up on that stagecoach?" "I escaped." Her hand unconsciously moved to her side, not to the fresh wound, but to a spot on her back. 2 weeks ago. I've been running ever since." "Those men today, Voss's people." She nodded. "He never gives up. Never." Her voice caught. "I'm putting you in danger just by being here." Jed let the curtain fall back into place. "Miss Warren, I'm going to check the perimeter. Lock the door behind me. There's a loaded shotgun under the sofa," Martha insisted, "even though I wouldn't keep my service revolver in the house." "Martha." "My wife." He didn't elaborate further, just pulled on his coat and reached for his hat. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." Outside, the rain had lessened to a steady drizzle. Jed moved silently around his property, checking the barn, the woodshed, the root cellar. The animals were undisturbed, but as he circled back toward the house, he noticed something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Boot prints in the mud near the edge of his property, fresh ones heading toward the tree line. Someone was watching the house. Jed followed the tracks a short distance before they disappeared into the pines. He stood perfectly still listening. Nothing but the patter of raindrops on needles and leaves. But he knew they were out there, waiting, watching. When he returned to the house, Abigail was sitting exactly where he'd left her, the shotgun across her lap. Her knuckles were white on the barrel. "They're here," she whispered, not a question. Jed nodded, removing his wet coat. "At least 3 men watching from the trees. They found me." Her voice was hollow with despair. "They never stopped looking." Jed moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the flames. The crackling wood filled the silence between them. "Miss Warren," he said finally, "I need to know what I'm dealing with. The full truth." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I'm nothing but trouble to you." Instead of answering, Jed walked to the wall of photographs and carefully removed one, bringing it to her. A black and white portrait of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Martha," he said simply. "She never could turn away someone in trouble. Used to say it was our duty to help when we could." He returned the photograph to its place. "Been 5 years since she passed." Heart gave out. He didn't mention how empty the house had felt since then, how the silence sometimes grew so loud he'd talk to her photographs just to hear a human voice. "I'm sorry, Boom," Abigail said softly. Jed nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "Now the truth, if you please." Abigail took a deep breath. "I was taken 8 months ago from St. Louis. I had just completed my first year of nurses training." Her fingers traced unconscious patterns on the shotgun barrel. "They came at night, 3 men. They put something over my face, chloroform, I think. When I woke up, I was in a wagon with 5 other women, all drugged, all terrified." She described a journey of several days ending at a remote compound. There, the women were separated, locked in individual rooms. Voss called it conditioning, breaking our spirit, making us compliant. Her voice grew distant. "Some women never fought back. Some fought until they couldn't anymore." She pushed up her sleeve, revealing old scars around her wrist. "I was one of the fighters." Jed's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Voss runs an operation selling women to mining camps, remote ranches, anywhere men outnumber women 20 to 1. Her voice hardened. "He makes it look legitimate, creates false documents, bounty notices, arrest warrants. Anyone who buys us believes they're participating in some kind of prison labor program or debt repayment scheme. And no one questions it. Who would they ask? The local law?" Her laugh was bitter. "Half the sheriffs and judges in the territory are on his payroll. The others are too afraid to cross him." Jed was silent for a long moment. "How'd you escape?" "Patience, observation. I memorized the guards' routines, the layout of the compound." A flicker of pride crossed her face. "I have what doctors call an eidetic memory. I remember everything I see perfectly." She described waiting for a stormy night when the guards would be distracted picking the lock with a piece of wire she'd painstakingly worked loose from her bed frame over weeks. "I took nothing but the clothes on my back. Ran for 2 days before I found a farmhouse where the woman took pity on me. She gave me money for the stagecoach." Jed nodded slowly, processing her story. It explained much: her reaction to his badge, her competence with her wound, her constant vigilance. "You believe me?" she asked, studying his face. "I do." He moved to the window again, checking the darkness. "Get some rest if you can. We'll decide our next move in the morning." But morning came sooner than expected. Just as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, the sound of approaching horses broke the pre-dawn silence. Jed, who had dozed in the armchair by the fire, was instantly alert. Abigail sat up from where she'd been sleeping on the sofa, fear evident in her eyes. "Stay inside," Jed ordered, moving to the window. 5 riders approached the house, led by a tall man in a black duster. Even at a distance, there was something unsettling about him, something in his posture that suggested absolute confidence, or perhaps absolute ruthlessness. "Voss," Abigail whispered, her face draining of color. Jed's hand moved reflexively to his hip, but the holster wasn't there. Hadn't been there for a decade. He felt naked without it. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell." The voice carried easily across the yard, cultured and pleasant. Nothing like what Jed had expected. "Might we have a word?" Jed glanced at Abigail. "Stay out of sight." Get the shotgun. He stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind him. The 5 men remained mounted, a deliberate intimidation tactic that Jed recognized from his own days enforcing the law. Keep the high ground. Make them look up at you. This is private property, Jed called evenly. Sebastian Voss smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. He was younger than Jed had expected, perhaps 40, with sharp features and pale blue eyes that assessed everything with clinical detachment. His black duster was immaculate, despite the dusty ride, his boots polished to a military shine. Indeed it is. Silverwood Ranch, owned by Jedediah Caldwell, for what is it now, 15 years? Voss tilted his head slightly. Before that, you served as Sheriff of Redemption for 22 years. Distinguished service record in Vietnam before that. Sharpshooter, if I recall correctly. The detailed knowledge of his background sent a chill through Jed. State your business. I'm looking for a fugitive. Voss reached into his coat and produced an official-looking document. Young woman, blonde, early 20s. Dangerous and desperate. Wanted for murder in Missouri. Jed's expression remained impassive. Haven't seen anyone matching that description? No. Voss smiled thinly. That's strange because my men tracked her directly to your property yesterday evening. He nodded toward one of his companions. Jasper here is quite skilled at tracking. Found blood on the road where there was an unfortunate incident with her escort. Jed remained silent, his eyes moving methodically between the 5 men assessing threats. 2 were obviously hired, muscle, heavy-set men with dull eyes and quick trigger fingers. The one called Jasper was leaner, more alert. The 4th man hung back slightly, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Mr. Caldwell, Voss continued, his tone conversational. I understand your reluctance. A man such as yourself with your background, your principles naturally feels protective toward a seemingly vulnerable young woman. He extended the document. But Abigail Warren is not what she appears to be. She's a murderer, Mr. Caldwell. Killed a man in cold blood back in St. Louis. I have the warrant for her arrest right here, signed by Judge Harmon of the 8th Circuit Court. Jed made no move to take the paper. If she's wanted in Missouri, what's your jurisdiction here in Dakota Territory? Voss's smile tightened fractionally. I'm authorized to pursue fugitives across state lines. I can show you my papers if you'd like. I would. Something dangerous flickered in Voss's eyes, quickly masked. He nodded to the 4th man, who reached into his saddlebag and produced another document, riding forward to hand it to Jed. As the man drew closer, Jed recognized him with a jolt of surprise. Maxwell Bennett, current Sheriff of Redemption. The young deputy Jed had personally trained and recommended as his replacement when he retired. Morning, Jed, Bennett said quietly, not meeting his former mentor's eyes. Jed took the document, keeping his face carefully neutral as he examined it. The authorization appeared legitimate, complete with the territorial governor's seal. I'm surprised to see you riding with Mr. Voss, Sheriff Bennett, Jed said evenly. Bennett shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Just doing my job, following the law. Voss interjected smoothly. Sheriff Bennett has been most helpful. In fact, he specifically suggested we speak with you. His cold eyes fixed on Jed. He mentioned you were his mentor, that you taught him everything he knows about upholding the law. The implication hung in the air between them. Jed looked from Bennett back to Voss, seeing the trap closing around him. I know you haven't touched a gun in 10 years, Caldwell. Voss said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. Not since that unfortunate incident with the young bank robber. What was his name? Ah, yes, Timothy. Timothy Voss. Jed's blood ran cold. My brother was only 19, Voss continued, his pleasant tone unchanged. Caught up with the wrong crowd, made some poor decisions. But he didn't deserve to die on the floor of that bank. He had a gun to a teller's head, Jed replied flatly. Details. Voss waved a dismissive hand. The point is, I know who you are. I know what you can and cannot do. And I strongly suggest you don't start handling firearms again today. He gestured toward the house. Now, where is Abigail Warren? Jed stood motionless on the perch, acutely aware of the disadvantage he faced. 5 armed men, no weapon of his own within reach. And somewhere behind him, a wounded young woman with a shotgun she might or might not know how to use effectively. I'll need time to verify these documents, he said finally. Voss's smile vanished. This isn't a negotiation, Caldwell. The woman is a fugitive, and you're harboring her. That makes you an accessory. He nodded to his men who spread out slightly, hands moving to their weapons. I have no desire to spill more blood than necessary, but make no mistake, I will do what I must. Under whose authority? Jed demanded. A piece of paper is just a piece of paper. Under the authority of Sheriff Bennett here, Voss replied smoothly. Isn't that right, Sheriff? All eyes turned to Bennett, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Jed, he said quietly, just give her up. This doesn't have to get ugly. It already is ugly, Jed replied. Max, I taught you better than this. Bennett flushed but said nothing more. Voss's patience visibly thinned. Enough! You have 30 seconds to produce the Warren woman, or my men will search your property. His hand moved to his own holster. And I assure you we will find her. The door behind Jed creaked open. Abigail stepped onto the porch, the shotgun held steadily in her hands. Her face was pale but determined. I'm right here, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. No need to threaten an innocent man. Voss's expression changed subtly, satisfaction mixed with something darker. Miss Warren, how good of you to join us. Jed moved protectively in front of her. Go back inside. It's over, Mr. Caldwell, she said softly. I won't have your blood on my hands, too. Listen to the lady, Voss said. She knows when she's beaten. Abigail stepped forward, the shotgun still in her hands but no longer aimed. I'll go with you on one condition. Voss raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to make demands. One condition, she repeated firmly. You leave Mr. Caldwell alone. He had no idea who I was or that anyone was looking for me. I told him I'd been robbed on the road. Jed started to protest, but she silenced him with a look. Voss considered for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Drop the shotgun and come down to the yard. Your word, she insisted. I want your word that no harm comes to him. You have my word, Voss said, his tone mocking, for whatever that's worth to you. Abigail carefully set the shotgun down and descended the porch steps. As she approached Voss's horse, Jed felt a surge of helpless anger. The kind he hadn't felt in 10 years, not since he'd hung up his badge. This isn't right, he called to Bennett. Max, you know this isn't right. Bennett wouldn't meet his eyes. Voss, however, turned back to Jed with an almost pitying look. Ah, the moral certainty of the aged lawman, he said. Tell me, Caldwell, in all your years wearing that badge, did you ever question whether the law you upheld was just, or did you simply follow orders? Enforce the rules handed down by men in positions of power? He gestured for one of his men to dismount and secure Abigail. The world is changing. The West is being tamed, civilized. And in this new order, everything has a price. Even people. The man roughly grabbed Abigail's arms, binding her wrists with a rope. She didn't struggle, but her eyes never left Jed's face. I'm sorry, she mouthed silently. Something snapped inside Jed. 10 years of carefully maintained restraint shattered in an instant. He lunged for the shotgun Abigail had set down. Jed, no, Bennett shouted, but it was Voss who reacted fastest, drawing his pistol with practiced speed. The shot cracked through the morning air. Jed felt the bullet whiz past his ear, splintering the porch post beside him. That was a warning, Voss called calmly. The next one won't be. Jed froze his hand inches from the shotgun. I gave my word no harm would come to you, Voss continued. Don't make me break that promise. Slowly, Jed straightened his hands, raised slightly. This isn't over, Voss. I believe it is. Voss holstered his weapon. Miss Warren will face justice for her crimes. You'll return to your solitary existence, and the world will continue turning unconcerned with either of you. He nodded to the man holding Abigail. Put her on Jasper's horse. As they mounted up, Abigail caught Jed's eye one last time. There was no accusation in her gaze, only a strange mixture of resignation and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Thank you for trying, she said softly. Then they were riding away, Abigail bound and seated in front of the tracker called Jasper. Bennett lingered a moment longer than the others. I'm sorry, Jed, he said, sounding genuinely regretful. It's complicated. It's not complicated at all, Jed replied coldly. It's cowardice. Bennett flinched as if struck. Without another word, he turned his horse and followed the others. Jed stood on the porch long after they disappeared from sight, his hands still trembling with rage and a deeper emotion he was reluctant to name. Failure. He'd failed to protect someone who needed protection, failed to stand against injustice when it mattered. Inside the house, he moved with grim purpose. From beneath a loose floorboard in his bedroom, he retrieved a dusty wooden box. The brass key was still on a chain around his neck, unworn, but never discarded. The lock turned with a reluctant click. Inside lay his Colt revolver, meticulously cleaned and oiled despite 10 years of disuse. Beside it, the tarnished sheriff's badge he'd worn for over 2 decades. He lifted the gun, feeling its familiar weight in his hand. The weapon that had taken Timothy Voss's life. The weapon he'd sworn never to touch again. But some promises he realized had to be broken to keep others. "I'm sorry, Martha," he whispered to the empty room. "But you'd do the same." The law offices of Coleman & Son occupied a modest building on Redemption's Main Street. The and Son part had become a fiction nearly 15 years ago when Luther Coleman Jr. had abandoned his father's practice for the allure of a Denver firm. Now only Luther Sr. remained a stooped figure with wispy white hair and spectacles that constantly slid down his nose. When Jed entered, the old man was hunched over his desk, squinting at a legal document. He glanced up, surprise registering on his weathered face. "Jedediah Caldwell," he said, removing his spectacles. "Twice in 1 year must be some kind of record." Jed removed his hat. "Need your help, Luther." Coleman gestured to a chair across from his desk. Sit. What brings Redemption's most reclusive rancher to town on a Tuesday?" Jed remained standing. "Sebastian Voss. What do you know about him?" The change in Coleman's demeanor was immediate. His bushy eyebrows drew together, and he glanced nervously at the window before rising to pull the shade down. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked quietly. "He took a young woman from my property this morning. Claims she's wanted for murder." Coleman sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 78 years. "Oh, Jed, you've stepped in it now. What can you tell me?" "Officially, Voss is a licensed bounty hunter operating throughout the territories." Coleman pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his brow. "Unofficially, he's a modern-day slave trader with powerful connections." Jed placed the arrest warrant for Abigail on the desk. "Is this legitimate?" Coleman examined the document carefully, holding it up to the light at one point. "The paper is genuine. The seal appears correct, but the signature?" He shook his head. "I've seen Judge Harmon's signature many times. This isn't it." "So it's a forgery." "A good one." Coleman set the document down. "But yes, a forgery." Jed's jaw tightened. "And Bennett, our sheriff, is riding with this man." Coleman sighed heavily. "Maxwell is compromised." Meaning Voss has something on him." Coleman leaned forward. "About 6 months ago, there was an incident. A shootout at the Broken Spoke Saloon. 3 men dead, including a bystander caught in the crossfire." "I hadn't heard about that." "It was kept quiet, very quiet." Coleman's voice dropped even lower. "Because one of Bennett's bullets killed that bystander. A traveling salesman from Chicago." Jed absorbed this information with growing anger. "And Voss knows. Voss knows everything about everyone in these parts. That's his true power." Coleman adjusted his spectacles nervously. "Secrets are more valuable than gold, Jed, and more dangerous." "Where would he take her?" Coleman hesitated. "Jed, think about what you're doing. You're one man. Voss has a small army." "Up where, Bree?" The old lawyer sighed in resignation. "There's a compound about 20 miles northeast of here near Blackwater Creek. It's where he processes his merchandise before shipment." The crude terminology made Jed's stomach turn. "And no one stops this?" "Who would?" Coleman spread his hands helplessly. "Half the circuit judges are in his pocket. The territorial marshal looks the other way. Even the army won't interfere. Too many officers enjoy the services Voss provides to remote outposts." Jed turned to leave, but Coleman's next words stopped him cold. "He's the reason Martha died, you know." Jed slowly turned back. "What did you say?" Coleman's face was grave. "Martha was helping girls escape, giving them money, clothes, a place to hide until they could get somewhere safe." "That's not possible." Jed's voice was barely a whisper. "She would have told me." "Would she?" Coleman asked gently. "With your position as sheriff, with your strict adherence to the law, she knew how you'd react, Jed. She knew you'd confront Voss directly, badge and gun in hand, and she knew that would get you killed." Jed felt as if the floor were tilting beneath him. "Martha died of heart failure." "That's what the doctor said," Coleman agreed. "But heart failure can be induced. Certain poisons mimic the symptoms perfectly. The room seemed to close in around Jed. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. How long have you known this? Suspected not known, Coleman corrected. Since shortly after her death. A girl Martha had helped came to me terrified. Said Voss had told her what happened to interfering women in explicit detail. Coleman removed his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose. I couldn't prove anything, Jed. And you weren't in a state to hear such things. Jed remembered those dark days after Martha's death. The disbelief, the crushing grief, and then just months later the bank robbery that ended with him shooting Timothy Voss, the final straw that led to him hanging up his badge for good. A cold realization dawned. It wasn't coincidence. Upon the bank robbery, Timothy Voss, it was all connected. Coleman nodded slowly. I've often wondered about that myself. Jed straightened, a terrible calm settling over him. I need more than suspicions, Luther. I need proof. What are you planning to do? Whatever it takes. Coleman studied him for a long moment, then opened a drawer in his desk. He removed a small key and handed it to Jed. Martha left something in my safekeeping. Bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the back. A journal. Jed took the key, his hand trembling slightly. Be careful, Jed, Coleman warned. Voss has built his empire on violence and fear, and he has a particular hatred for you. Let him hate, Jed replied, his voice hard as steel. It's about time someone made him afraid. The journal was small-bound in faded blue leather. Martha's elegant handwriting filled its pages, dates, locations, names. Girls as young as 14, women as old as 40. All of them victims of Sebastian Voss's operation. All of them helped by Martha Caldwell in secret, right under her husband's nose. Jed sat at Luther Coleman's desk, the journal open before him, a glass of whiskey untouched at his elbow. Each entry was a knife to his heart. How had he not seen? How had he not known what his own wife was doing? The final entry was dated 2 days before her death. A brief note about a girl named Catherine who had escaped from the Creek property and needed transportation to Minnesota. Martha had arranged for a sympathetic freight driver to take her north. The words at the bottom of the page blurred as Jed stared at them. I fear V suspects. Must be more careful. Coleman had stepped out to give Jed privacy, but now he returned, closing the door softly behind him. There's more, he said, in the back. Jed turned to the final pages. What he found there made his blood run cold. Names, dates, amounts. A detailed accounting of bribes paid to officials throughout the territory, judges, marshals, sheriffs. And there near the bottom, Sheriff M. Bennett, 517. Where did she get this information? Jed asked hoarsely. One of the girls she helped had worked as Voss's bookkeeper, copied his ledger before she fled. Coleman took the chair opposite Jed. Martha was building a case, gathering evidence for the federal authorities. She believed if she could document enough corruption, they'd have to act. Jed closed the journal, his decision made. I need to speak with Bennett. He won't help you, Jed. He can't. We'll see about that. As Jed rose to leave, Coleman caught his arm. There's something else you should know about Voss. Jed waited. There are rumors that Voss isn't the top of the chain. Coleman lowered his voice. They say he answers to someone with even more power. Someone they call the judge. Harrison, Jed asked, naming the circuit court judge who presided over most of the serious cases in the territory. Coleman shook his head. I don't know, but whoever it is, they've managed to stay completely in the shadows while Voss does the dirty work. Jed tucked the journal into his coat. I appreciate your help, Luther. I didn't do this for you, the old lawyer replied. I did it for Martha. She was the bravest person I ever knew. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on Redemption's dusty main street. Jed stood for a moment on the boardwalk, feeling the weight of the journal against his chest, the weight of revelations pressing down on him. 5 years. 5 years he'd lived with only half the truth about his wife's death. Now the full truth was burning a hole in his pocket, and with it, a growing fire of purpose, unlike anything he'd felt in a decade. The sheriff's office was at the end of the street. Bennett would be there, or if not, someone would know where to find him. Jed started walking, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. From the shadows of an alley, a figure emerged, thin, ragged, and visibly nervous. A young man barely out of his teens with darting eyes and fidgeting hands. Mr. Caldwell, he whispered as Jed passed. Jed paused, his hand instinctively moving toward his revolver. "Got a message for you," the young man said, glancing anxiously up and down the street. "From the lady." "What lady?" "The one Voss took." He held out a folded piece of paper. "She paid me to deliver this, said it was life or death." Jed took the paper along with the silver dollar the young man clearly expected. As soon as the coin touched his palm, the messenger disappeared back into the alley. The note was written in a hurried hand, the letters cramped but precise. "Mr. Caldwell, they're taking us to the auction tonight. Blackwater Creek warehouse near the railroad crossing. 8 women total. Voss has something of yours, something Martha left behind. A book with names, it's why he killed her. There's more. Voss works for Judge Harrison. I've seen them together. The judge will be at the auction tonight. High-value buyers only. This is bigger than me, bigger than any of us. If you can't help, burn this note and forget you ever met me. If you can help, come alone. They're watching Bennett. The paper trembled in Jed's hand. Confirmation of everything Luther had told him and more. Judge Harrison, the most powerful legal authority in the territory, was the shadow figure behind Voss. And tonight they would both be at Blackwater Creek. Jed carefully folded the note and tucked it away. His path to the sheriff's office forgotten, he turned and headed toward the livery stable. He would need a fresh horse for the ride to Blackwater Creek. And ammunition. Plenty of ammunition. The old Jedediah Caldwell, the man who had hung up his gun and badge after taking a young man's life, was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. "I'm coming, Martha," he whispered. "I'm finally coming." The livery stable smelled of hay and horse sweat, familiar scents that grounded Jed as his mind raced with revelations. The elderly stable master, Edwin Porter, looked up from his work with surprise when Jed entered. "Twice in 1 week must be some kind of record," Porter remarked, echoing Luther Coleman's earlier words. "Need your strongest horse, Ed," Jed said, counting out coins from his pocket. "And your discretion." Porter's bushy eyebrows rose, but he asked no questions. In a town like Redemption, a man's business was his own. "Take Thunder, bay gelding in the 3rd stall. Not the fastest, but he'll run all day without tiring." As Porter prepared the horse, Jed noticed a Winchester rifle hanging on the wall. "That for sale?" "Belongs to Johnson, left it as collateral last month." Porter glanced at the weapon. "Could probably part with it for the right price." 10 minutes later, Jed rode out of town with the rifle secured in a saddle holster, his Colt revolver heavy on his hip. The familiar weight of the gun belt felt strange after so many years, like greeting an old friend who had aged in unexpected ways. He avoided the main road instead, taking a circuitous route through grazing land and scattered woodland. If Voss had men watching the town, Jed didn't want to advertise his departure or direction. The sun was beginning its westward descent, casting long shadows across the rolling prairie. Blackwater Creek was a 2-hour ride northeast longer by the indirect path Jed had chosen. He would arrive just after nightfall, when the auction would likely be underway. 1 man against Voss in his operation. The odds were impossibly long, but Jed had faced long odds before in the war and afterward. The key wasn't superior numbers. It was superior positioning and the element of surprise. And he had one advantage Voss might not expect: he knew exactly where he was going. During his years as sheriff, Jed had ridden every inch of the territory within 50 miles of Redemption. The old railroad warehouse at Blackwater Creek had been abandoned years ago when the new line was built 5 miles south, but Jed remembered it well. A large wooden structure with loading bays on both sides, a loft area that ran the length of the building, and several smaller storage rooms. Perfect for someone looking to conduct business away from prying eyes. As Thunder carried him steadily northeast, Jed's thoughts turned to Martha. How many secrets had she kept from him? How many nights had she slipped out to aid Voss's victims while he slept unaware? The Martha he thought he knew wouldn't have hidden such dangerous work from him. But perhaps he hadn't known her as well as he believed. The journal in his coat pocket seemed to burn against his chest. 5 years she'd been gone. 5 years he'd lived in isolation, nursing his grief and his guilt. Now he discovered her death hadn't been natural at all, but murder, calculated, cold-blooded murder by the same man who had orchestrated his professional downfall. The coincidence was too perfect. Timothy Voss Sebastian's younger brother appearing in Redemption just months after Martha's death. The bank robbery that went wrong. The moment when young Timothy had turned his gun toward a female teller and Jed had fired without hesitation. Had Sebastian Voss engineered the entire scenario to destroy Jed's life, to punish him for Martha's interference with his operation? The possibility made terrible sense. A flicker of movement in the distance caught Jed's attention, pulling him from his thoughts. He reined Thunder to a stop in the shelter of a stand of cottonwoods and squinted at the horizon. Two riders moving fast along the main road that Jed had deliberately avoided. Jed reached for the spyglass in his saddlebag, another purchase from Porter. Through the lens, he recognized one of the men who had accompanied Voss to his ranch that morning. The pair seemed to be in a hurry, headed toward redemption. Messengers, perhaps, or reinforcements. Either way, their presence confirmed Jed was on the right track. He waited until they were well past before continuing, now even more cautious. The land grew increasingly rugged as he approached Blackwater Creek, with rocky outcroppings and deeper ravines carved by the meandering waterway. The setting sun painted the landscape in shades of amber and crimson, a beautiful backdrop for the grim task ahead. Memories of the war returned unbidden. The tense stillness before an operation, the methodical preparation, the cold clarity that came with accepting one might not return. When the abandoned railroad crossing came into view, Jed dismounted and led Thunder into a secluded draw where the horse would be hidden and could graze. From here, he would continue on foot. The Winchester rifle felt reassuring in his hands as he checked the action and verified it was fully loaded. His revolver, too, was loaded and ready. He placed extra ammunition in his coat pockets, then paused, removing Martha's journal. He couldn't risk it being discovered if things went wrong. Carefully, he wrapped it in his bandana and buried it beneath a distinctive boulder, a landmark he could find again if he survived the night. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the fading light. As Jed had suspected, lanterns already glowed from within, and several horses were tethered outside. More concerning were the armed men positioned around the perimeter, at least 4 that he could see from his vantage point. He would need to find another way in. Jed circled the warehouse, keeping to the shadows and moving with the silent precision that had once made him an effective sharpshooter. Age had slowed him somewhat, but experience compensated for lost agility. He noted each guard's position, their patterns of movement, the weapons they carried. The north side of the warehouse backed up against a steep embankment where the railroad company had cut into the hillside. At the top of this embankment, a narrow window provided access to the loft area, and it appeared unguarded. Getting to it would be the challenge. The slope was steep and partially eroded, offering few handholds, but it was the best option among poor choices. Jed secured the rifle across his back and began the ascent, testing each handhold before trusting his weight to it. Loose rocks skittered down the embankment, and he froze, listening for any reaction from the guards. When none came, he continued upward, his muscles protesting the unaccustomed strain. At the top, he paused to catch his breath. Through the dirty window, he could see down into the warehouse. What he witnessed made his blood run cold. The open floor of the warehouse had been arranged like an auction house, with chairs set in rows facing a raised platform. On that platform stood a line of women, all wearing plain dresses, all with downcast eyes. Their wrists were bound before them, and they stood unnaturally still, like livestock at a county fair. Men filled most of the chairs, well-dressed men from what Jed could see. Ranchers, businessmen, and others of apparent means. To one side stood Sebastian Voss, immaculate in his black duster, gesturing toward the women as he spoke to the assembled buyers. And there, seated in a special chair to the right of the platform, was Judge Harrison. Even from a distance, Jed recognized the distinguished silver hair and imposing build of the circuit court judge. The most powerful legal authority in the territory was indeed overseeing this atrocity. Jed scanned the line of women searching for Abigail. He found her at the end, her blonde hair unmistakable, even in the dim lantern light. Unlike the others, her head was raised, her posture defiant despite her bonds. A guard patrolled the catwalk that ran along the loft area, passing just below Jed's position every few minutes. Timing would be crucial. The window was stuck, years of disuse having sealed it shut. Jed worked his knife around the frame, loosening the dried paint and dirt. When the guard's footsteps receded to the far end of the catwalk, Jed applied pressure, and the window finally gave way with a muted groan. He slipped inside, crouching low in the shadows of the loft. Dust and cobwebs covered discarded railroad equipment and wooden crates. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of old timber and rusted metal. From his elevated position, Jed could hear Voss's voice more clearly. Finest selection we've presented in some time, gentlemen. Each woman has been thoroughly vetted for health, temperament, and utility. Whether you seek a housekeeper, a nurse, or more personal companionship, assure you these women will meet your requirements. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Jed's jaw clenched at the casual dehumanization. We'll begin the bidding with lot number 1, Voss continued. Catherine stepped forward. A young woman with dark hair moved woodenly to the front of the platform. She couldn't have been more than 20. Catherine has experience as a domestic servant and shows aptitude for cooking. She's docile, obedient, and requires minimal correction. Shall we start the bidding at $100? Hands rose in the audience and the sickening auction began. Jed forced himself to focus on the task at hand rather than the injustice unfolding below. He needed to locate Bennett to understand the full scope of what he was facing. He found the sheriff standing near a side door, his expression troubled as he watched the proceedings. Bennett's presence confirmed what Abigail's note had suggested. He was compromised, but perhaps not entirely corrupted. A movement at the main entrance caught Jed's attention. 2 more men entered, the same riders Jed had spotted earlier. They approached Voss, speaking urgently in his ear. Voss's expression darkened. He glanced at Judge Harrison, then stepped away from the platform, gesturing for one of his lieutenants to continue the auction. Something had changed. Jed needed to move quickly. The guard passed below his position again, and Jed made his decision. As the man walked beneath him, Jed dropped silently from the loft landing behind the guard. Before the man could react, Jed's arm was around his throat in a vice-like grip. The guard struggled briefly, then went limp. Jed lowered him quietly to the catwalk floor, relieved to find a pulse still beating in the man's neck. He wasn't here to kill, if he could avoid it. Taking the guard's pistol, Jed now had 3 firearms, more than enough for what he needed to do. He dragged the unconscious man into a shadowy corner and used the guard's own belt to bind his hands and feet. From his new vantage point on the catwalk, Jed could see into a small office at the rear of the warehouse. Voss had retreated there with Judge Harrison and the 2 messengers. The conversation appeared heated, with Voss gesturing emphatically while Harrison remained coldly composed. On the auction floor, the bidding continued. 2 women had already been sold and were being held in a separate area. Abigail would be next. Jed needed a distraction. The warehouse's old construction worked to his advantage. Dried timber oil lanterns and a loft full of discarded materials created perfect conditions for a fire. Not a devastating blaze, but enough smoke and confusion to create chaos. He moved quickly, gathering loose papers and small pieces of wood into a pile in the far corner of the loft. Using matches from his pocket, he set the materials alight, then retreated along the catwalk. It didn't take long. Smoke began to fill the upper portion of the warehouse, and soon someone shouted, "Fire!" The reaction was immediate. Buyers jumped from their seats looking for exits. The women on the platform remained still, uncertain what to do with their captors in disarray. Voss emerged from the office, his face contorted with rage as he barked orders at his men. "Get those women secure. This changes nothing." In the confusion, Jed made his way down a ladder to the main floor, keeping to the shadows. He needed to reach Abigail before Voss's men regained control of the situation. Through the thickening smoke, he spotted her being herded toward a side door with the other women. 2 guards flanked the group, pistols drawn. Jed moved parallel to them, waiting for the right moment. It came when one of the guards began coughing violently from the smoke, momentarily doubling over. Jed stepped from the shadows, bringing the butt of his rifle down hard on the second guard's head. The man crumpled without a sound. The first guard straightened, reaching for his weapon, but froze when he found himself staring down the barrel of Jed's revolver. "Don't," Jed warned quietly. The guard's eyes widened in recognition. You're Caldwell." "Keys," Jed demanded. "Now." With trembling hands, the guard produced a ring of keys from his belt. Jed took them, never lowering his weapon. "Face down on the floor, hands behind your head." When the guard complied, Jed turned to the women, who watched him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Abigail stepped forward, extending her bound wrists. "Mr. Caldwell," she breathed. "You came." "Said I would." He unlocked her restraints, then handed her the keys. "Free the others, quickly." As Abigail worked on the other women's bonds, Jed secured the guard with his own belt, then peered through the smoke toward the main area. The fire was spreading faster than he'd intended, with flames now visible in the loft. Most of the buyers had fled, but Voss's men were regrouping, and Judge Harrison was nowhere to be seen. "This way," Jed said, guiding the freed women toward the side door. "Stay low away from the smoke." The door led to a small loading dock overlooking a steep drop to Blackwater Creek itself. Not an ideal escape route, but the only option with Voss's men between them and the main entrance. "Can you swim?" Jed asked the group. Some nodded, others looked terrified. One woman spoke up, Catherine, the first to be auctioned. "The creek isn't deep, but the current is strong." "It's our best chance," Abigail said, taking charge. "Follow the creek downstream. There's a bridge about half a mile down. Get across it and head for town." "What about you?" Catherine asked. Abigail exchanged a look with Jed. "We have unfinished business." Jed nodded. "Go, now." The women needed no further encouragement. One by one they climbed down from the loading dock and made their way to the creek, disappearing into the darkness. "You should go with them," Jed told Abigail when they were alone. "Not yet." Her eyes reflected the growing firelight. "Voss has to be stopped, permanently, or he'll just rebuild elsewhere." Before Jed could argue, a voice called from within the smoke-filled warehouse. "Caldwell, I know you're in here, Voss." Jed pushed Abigail behind him, raising his rifle. "Stay back." "I can help," she insisted. "I know this place. I've been watching them for days." The smoke was thickening, making it difficult to see or breathe. Jed made a quick decision. "There's a window in the loft, north side. Can you reach it?" Abigail nodded. "Get out that way. I'll meet you at the railroad crossing if I can." "If you can." Her eyes widened in alarm. "Go," he repeated firmly. "Now." Reluctantly, Abigail slipped back inside, disappearing into the smoke. Jed turned his attention to the voice that had called his name. Moving cautiously through the haze, he made his way toward the center of the warehouse. The fire had spread to one wall, casting eerie, dancing shadows through the smoke. The heat was becoming intense. "You're more resourceful than I gave you credit for, Caldwell," Voss's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "But this changes nothing." Jed spotted him near the auction platform, pistol in hand. Two of his men flanked him, their weapons drawn. "It's over, Voss," Jed called back. "The women are gone, your buyers have scattered, and soon this whole place will be ash." "Minor setbacks." Voss's voice remained infuriatingly calm. "Do you really think this is my only operation? That I can't simply relocate and start again?" He stepped forward, his pale eyes gleaming in the firelight. "You've accomplished nothing except signing your own death warrant on your own." "Maybe," Jed acknowledged, "but at least I'll die knowing Martha's work wasn't in vain." At the mention of Martha's name, Voss's composure slipped slightly. "Your wife was a meddlesome fool. She should have minded her own business." "Helping those girls was her business," Jed replied, his finger tightening on the trigger of his rifle. "Just like stopping you is mine." Voss laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Stop me. You're a relic, Caldwell. A remnant of a dying age. The West is changing. Men like me, men of vision and enterprise, we're the future." "Men like you have always existed," Jed countered, "and there have always been those who stand against you." The fire had reached the support beams now. The warehouse groaned ominously as the old wood began to give way. Time was running short. "Where's Harrison?" Jed demanded. "The judge gone." Voss smiled thinly. "He doesn't dirty his hands with the messy parts of our business. That's what I'm for." A burning beam crashed down nearby, showering them with sparks. Voss's men flinched, but their employer remained steady. "Speaking of messy parts," Voss continued, "did you know your protege Bennett has been working against me for months, feeding information to the federal marshals?" His smile widened at Jed's startled expression. "Oh yes, your boy grew a conscience. Unfortunately for him, I have friends everywhere, including in the marshal's office." The implication was clear. Bennett's apparent complicity had been a cover for something more complex and more dangerous. "Where is he now?" Jed asked, scanning the smoke-filled room. "Securing the back office, making sure certain documents don't survive this fire." Voss raised his pistol, "Which brings me to my final point. Martha's journal, I know you have it. Where is it?" The warehouse groaned again, more urgently this time. The entire structure was becoming unstable. Outside, Jed could hear shouts as Voss's remaining men organized themselves. "It's somewhere you'll never find it," Jed replied truthfully. Voss's smile vanished. "Then you're of no further use to me." He fired without warning. Jed dove to the side, the bullet splintering the wooden crate behind where he had been standing. Rolling behind a stack of barrels, Jed returned fire with his revolver. One of Voss's men cried out and fell. Voss and his remaining man spread out seeking better positions. The smoke provided both cover and confusion, making it difficult for either side to target effectively. A series of shots rang out from the direction of the office. Jed couldn't tell who was firing or why, but the distraction worked to his advantage. He moved quickly along the edge of the warehouse, using the growing fire as cover. When he spotted Voss again, the man was alone, his back partially turned as he shouted orders to unseen subordinates. It was the opening Jed needed. He raised his rifle, centering the sights on Voss's back. One shot would end it. Justice for Martha. Justice for all the women Voss had trafficked and abused. Jed's finger tightened on the trigger. Then he remembered Timothy Voss lying dead on the bank floor, his unseeing eyes staring at the ceiling. Remembered the weight that killing had placed on his soul. The reason he'd hung up his badge and gun. He lowered the rifle slightly, aiming instead for Voss's leg. "Sebastian Voss," he called, "you're under arrest." Voss turned surprise, registering on his face at Jed's position. Then he laughed. "Under arrest, you're not the law anymore, Caldwell." "Citizen's arrest," Jed replied, "for murder, kidnapping, and slavery." "And who's going to enforce that?" Voss raised his pistol again. "You're alone, old man, always have been." "He's not alone." The new voice came from behind Voss. Sheriff Maxwell Bennett emerged from the smoke, his own weapon trained on Voss's back. "Drop it, Voss," Bennett ordered. "It's over." For a moment it seemed Voss might comply. His shoulders slumped slightly and his pistol lowered a fraction. Then with snake-like speed he whirled and fired at Bennett. The sheriff staggered, clutching his shoulder. Jed fired simultaneously, his bullet striking Voss in the leg as intended. Voss fell to one knee but remained upright, his pistol now trained on Bennett's head for a killing shot. Jed didn't hesitate. His second shot struck Voss in the chest. The bounty hunter jerked backwards, surprise etched on his features. His pistol clattered to the floor as he collapsed. The warehouse gave another ominous groan, this one accompanied by the splintering crack of major support beams giving way. The fire had compromised the structure beyond recovery. "We need to get out, now," Jed shouted, rushing to Bennett's side. The sheriff was pale but conscious, blood seeping through the fingers pressed to his shoulder. "Voss," he gasped. Jed glanced at the fallen man. Voss wasn't moving, his eyes open and vacant. "Dead," Bennett nodded grimly. "The office important documents evidence." "No time," Jed insisted, supporting Bennett's weight as they stumbled toward the nearest exit. "This whole place is coming down." They barely made it through the door before the warehouse roof began to collapse, sending a plume of sparks and burning debris into the night sky. Outside, confusion reigned. Voss's men were scattered, some fleeing, others trying to control the horses that had been spooked by the fire. Jed guided Bennett away from the chaos down the slope toward the creek where the women had escaped earlier. In the darkness, no one paid them any attention, just two more figures fleeing the inferno. When they reached the water's edge, Jed helped Bennett sit against a boulder. The young sheriff's face was ashen in the moonlight, his breathing labored. "How bad?" Jed asked, examining the wound. "I'll live," Bennett grimaced. "Not my first bullet." Jed tore a strip from his own shirt to create a makeshift bandage. As he worked, Bennett spoke in halting sentences. "Been working with Federal Marshal Lawrence, 6 months now, gathering evidence on Voss and Harrison." "Luther told me you were compromised," Jed said. "That Voss had something on you." Bennett nodded weakly. "The shooting at the Broken Spoke, civilian casualty. Voss knew, used it to force me to cooperate." "But you were playing both sides." "Trying to." Bennett winced as Jed tightened the bandage. "Didn't know who to trust. Voss has people everywhere, even in the marshal's office." Jed sat back on his heels, studying the younger man. "Why didn't you come to me?" Bennett's laugh turned into a cough. "You were done with all this, Jed. Made that clear when you left. Besides, wasn't sure how you'd react to what I did." The admission hung between them, an echo of Martha's decision to keep her activities secret from her husband. How many people had judged Jed too rigid, too bound by the letter of the law to understand the necessity of working outside it sometimes? "I would have helped," Jed said quietly. "You're helping now." Bennett gestured toward the burning warehouse. "And I'm grateful." The sound of approaching riders interrupted their conversation. Jed reached for his rifle, but Bennett placed a restraining hand on his arm. It's Lawrence, he said, federal marshal. He was supposed to meet me here tonight. Sure enough, the riders wore the distinctive badges of federal marshals. They dismounted quickly, taking in the scene with professional efficiency. A tall man with a weathered face and a silver star on his chest approached them. Bennett, what in God's name happened here? Fire got away from us, Marshal Lawrence, Bennett replied, attempting to stand. Jed supported him with a steady hand, but we got what we came for. Voss is dead. Lawrence's gaze shifted to Jed. And who might you be? Jedediah Caldwell, Jed replied, former sheriff of Redemption. Recognition dawned in the marshal's eyes. Caldwell, Bennett's mentioned you. He glanced at the burning warehouse. We were supposed to gather evidence tonight, not burn it all to hell. Not all of it burned, Jed said. I have Martha's journal, names, dates, amounts. Every official Voss and Harrison bribed. Lawrence's eyebrows rose. Martha, but my wife, Jed explained. She was helping Voss's victims escape. He killed her for it 5 years ago. The marshal absorbed this information with a nod. Where is this journal now? Hidden, not far from here. And Judge Harrison? Gone, Bennett interjected. Fled when the fire started. Lawrence swore under his breath. He's the one we really wanted. Voss was just the muscle. Harrison won't get far, Jed said confidently. Not with what I know now. As if on cue, a woman's voice called from the darkness. Mr. Caldwell. Abigail emerged from the shadows, her dress torn and dirty, but her posture straight and determined. Behind her came 3 more federal marshals, their expressions grim. Miss Warren, Jed acknowledged. I thought I told you to go with the others. I did, she replied, but I came back with help. She gestured to the marshals. They found us at the bridge. The other women are safe now. Lawrence looked at Abigail with newfound interest. You're the one Bennett mentioned, the witness. She nodded. I can identify everyone involved. Every buyer, every guard, every official. Her voice hardened. Including my father. Jed started. Your father? Judge Harrison. Abigail said, her eyes never leaving Jed's face. He's my father. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Jed looked at Bennett, who nodded in confirmation. That's why her testimony is so crucial, Bennett explained. She can connect Harrison directly to Voss's operation, not just as a corrupt judge, but as an active participant. Abigail's expression is a mixture of pain and determination. He sold me to Voss when I discovered what he was doing. His own daughter, her voice trembled slightly, said it was fitting punishment for a disobedient child. The cruelty of it struck Jed speechless. He had thought himself familiar with the depths of human depravity after decades as a lawman, but this, a father selling his own child into captivity, surpassed understanding. Lawrence broke the heavy silence. We need to move. Harrison has a 2-hour head start and he'll be heading for the territorial border. He'll go to Fort Collins, Abigail said with certainty. He has a house there under another name. I've seen the deed. Lawrence nodded to his men. Saddle up. We ride for Fort Collins. He turned to Bennett. You need medical attention. I'm leaving 2 men to escort you back to Redemption. I'm coming with you, Bennett protested, though he could barely stand. Not with that shoulder, you're not, Lawrence replied firmly. You've done your part, Sheriff. Now let us do ours. As the marshals prepared to depart, Jed approached Lawrence. I'm coming too. The marshal sized him up with a critical eye. This is federal business now, Caldwell. Harrison had my wife killed, Jed said quietly, and I have the only evidence that can put him away for good. Lawrence hesitated, then nodded once. Get your journal. Be ready to ride in 5 minutes. When the marshal moved away, Abigail stepped closer to Jed. Thank you, she said softly, for believing me, for coming back. You risked everything to get me that note, Jed replied. Least I could do was show up. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. We make a good team. Despite the gravity of the situation, Jed found himself returning the smile. That we do, Miss Warren. That we do. So, the ride to Fort Collins was grueling. Jed's body, unaccustomed to such prolonged exertion, protested with every mile, but he pushed through the pain, driven by a purpose that transcended physical discomfort. Lawrence had insisted Abigail ride with the marshals while Jed recovered Martha's journal and followed on Thunder. The powerful bay gelding lived up to Porter's praise, maintaining a steady pace despite the punishing terrain and darkness. They reached Fort Collins shortly before dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten with the promise of sunrise. The town was quiet, most of its residents still asleep. Abigail directed them to an elegant house on the outskirts, set back from the road, and surrounded by a well-kept garden. It looked perfectly respectable, the home of a successful businessman or professional, not a criminal mastermind. Lawrence deployed his men with hand signals surrounding the property before approaching the front door. Jed remained with Abigail at a safe distance, watching as the marshals executed their raid with precision. To their surprise, the door opened at the first knock. A distinguished-looking man in his 50s stood in the doorway fully dressed despite the early hour. His silver hair was impeccably groomed, his bearing aristocratic. "Marshal Lawrence," he said, his voice cultured and calm. "I've been expecting you." Judge Harrison made no attempt to flee or resist as the marshals placed him under arrest. He surrendered his pistol without protest and allowed himself to be handcuffed. His composure was absolute, as if being arrested was a minor inconvenience rather than the end of his career and freedom. It was only when he was being led to a waiting wagon that he noticed Abigail standing beside Jed. For a brief moment, his mask of indifference slipped, revealing a flash of something. Not remorse, Jed thought. Perhaps regret that his plans had been thwarted. Or simple surprise that the daughter he had discarded had proven to be his undoing. "Abigail," Harrison said, his voice betraying no emotion. "You've chosen your side, I see." "I chose humanity, Father," she replied steadily. "Something you abandoned long ago." Harrison's gaze shifted to Jed. "And you must be Caldwell, Martha's husband." The casual mention of Martha's name from the lips of the man who had ordered her death nearly broke Jed's hard-won composure. He stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving toward his revolver. Lawrence intercepted him with a warning look. "He's not worth it, Caldwell." Harrison smiled thinly. "Listen to the marshal, Mr. Caldwell. Violence solves nothing." Rich words from a man who traffics in human misery. Jed replied, his voice low and dangerous. "Business," Harrison corrected. "Simply business, the oldest form of commerce known to man." "You sold your own daughter," Jed said incredulously. Harrison shrugged. "She was a disappointment, soft-hearted like her mother, unsuited to the realities of our world." "You'll hang for what you've done," Jed promised. "Perhaps." Harrison's composure never wavered. "But I doubt it. Men of my standing rarely face the ultimate penalty regardless of their crimes. A comfortable prison at worst. And I have resources you cannot imagine." His confidence was chilling. Even in defeat, Harrison believed himself beyond true justice. And the worst part was he might be right. Wealthy, connected men often escape the consequences that would destroy ordinary citizens. Lawrence signaled to his men, "Get him in the wagon, we're leaving." As they led Harrison away, Abigail moved closer to Jed. "He's wrong, you know, about getting away with it." "I hope so," Jed replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "I know so." Her eyes held a fierce determination. "Because I won't stop until he faces justice. I'll testify in every court in the territory if I have to." Jed studied her for a moment, seeing not just the trauma she had endured, but the strength it had forged. "What will you do when this is over?" She looked surprised, as if the question hadn't occurred to her. I don't know. Go back to my nurse's training, perhaps, if they'll have me." "You could come to Redemption," Jed suggested. "Town could use a nurse, and I suspect you might find people there willing to help you start over." A tentative smile touched her lips. "People like you, Mr. Caldwell." "Maybe." He felt suddenly awkward, aware of how his offer might sound. "I just mean—" "I know what you mean," she interrupted gently. "And thank you. It's something to consider." Lawrence approached them, his expression serious. "We're heading back to the territorial capital. Harrison will be held there until trial." He looked at Abigail. "We'll need your testimony, Miss Warren, and yours too, Caldwell." Jed nodded, handing over Martha's journal. "Everything you need is in here. Names, dates, amounts." Martha was thorough. The marshal leafed through the journal, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the entries. "This is extensive, more than enough to bring charges against at least a dozen officials." "Use it well," Jed said. "Make sure her death wasn't for nothing." Lawrence closed the journal carefully. "I will. You have my word." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "You did good work here, Caldwell. Both of you did. The territory owes you a debt. Jed shook the offered hand, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders, not completely, but enough to notice the difference. For 5 years he had carried the burden of Martha's death, believing it was a natural, if tragic, event. Now he knew the truth, and while that truth was painful, it also provided a kind of release. Justice had been served. Not perfectly, perhaps, but as well as imperfect humans could manage in an imperfect world. As the marshals departed with their prisoner, Jed and Abigail remained standing in the early morning light. The town was beginning to stir around them, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in its midst. "What now?" Abigail asked, her voice tired but resolute. Jed looked eastward toward Redemption and Silverwood Ranch, toward home. "Now we go back," he said simply, "and start again." The sun crested the horizon, bathing them in golden light. A new day, a new beginning, for both of them. The journey back to Redemption was slower than the urgent ride to Fort Collins. Jed and Abigail traveled at a more measured pace, giving Thunder time to recover and allowing Jed's aging body the rest it demanded after days of unaccustomed exertion. They made camp as the sun began to set, finding shelter in a small grove of cottonwoods near a tributary of Blackwater Creek. Jed built a modest fire while Abigail gathered water from the stream. The domesticity of the task felt strange after the violence and tension of the past 2 days. Neither spoke much, both lost in their own thoughts, processing all that had occurred. As darkness settled around them, Abigail finally broke the silence. "Do you think it will work, the trial, I mean?" Jed looked up from tending the fire. "Hard to say. Harrison has friends in high places. But so did Voss, and look what happened to him." "Voss was expendable," Jed replied. "Men like Harrison design their empires so there's always someone else to take the fall." Abigail pulled her knees to her chest, staring into the flames. "You sound like you don't believe he'll face justice, Mom." Jed considered his words carefully. "I believe Marshal Lawrence will do everything in his power to see Harrison convicted. And with your testimony and Martha's journal, there's a chance. But you have doubts. I've seen too many guilty men go free and too many innocent ones hang to have complete faith in the system." He prodded the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying." Abigail nodded, absorbing his words. "My father always told me that justice was whatever the powerful decided it was. I believed him for a long time. And now I think justice is what ordinary people fight for even when the odds are against them." She looked directly at Jed. "Like you did, like Martha did." The mention of his wife's name no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Instead, Jed felt a complex mixture of pride, sorrow, and newfound understanding. "Martha saw what needed doing and did it," he said quietly. "While I was busy upholding the law, she was busy upholding justice. There's a difference." "She must have been remarkable." "She was." Jed's voice softened with memory. "Stubborn as the day is long. Wouldn't take no for an answer once she set her mind to something. But she had the biggest heart of anyone I ever knew." Abigail smiled. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Jed said with certainty. "She always had a soft spot for fighters." They fell silent again, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Abigail spoke in a more hesitant voice. "What you said back in Fort Collins about coming to Redemption?" "Offer stands," Jed replied simply. "It's just, I don't know if I can start over so close to all this." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the events of the past days. "Every time I'd see the warehouse or Blackwater Creek." "Memories can be heavy," Jed acknowledged. "No one would blame you for wanting to leave them behind." "But you stayed," she pointed out. "After Martha died, after everything with Timothy Voss, you didn't leave." Jed hadn't thought of it that way before. Why had he remained in Redemption when every street corner held memories of his failures? The question settled in his mind, demanding consideration. "Silverwood was Martha's dream," he said finally. "The ranch, the house, she planned it all. Leaving felt like losing her again." The admission hung in the night air between them, more vulnerable than Jed had intended. He cleared his throat and added, "Besides, running never solved anything. The ghosts just follow you to new places." Abigail considered this. Maybe some ghosts need to be confronted before they'll rest. "Like your father?" "Yes." Her voice was steady now. "I need to see this through. The trial, the testimony, all of it. I need to look him in the eye when they pronounce the sentence for him. Jed nodded, respecting her resolve. Then that's what you'll do. And after that, she left the thought unfinished, but a tentative smile touched her lips. Maybe redemption could use a nurse. Something warm unfurled in Jed's chest, not romantic affection, but a different kind of connection. Recognition, perhaps. Kinship forged in shared purpose. Reckon it could at that, he agreed. They spoke little more that night, each finding comfort in the quiet presence of the other. When Abigail finally slept, wrapped in Jed's spare blanket, her face looked younger, the lines of tension momentarily erased. Jed remained awake longer, watching the fire die down to embers. For the first time in 5 years, he felt the stirring of something like purpose. Not the duty that had driven him as a sheriff, but something more personal, more meaningful. He thought of Martha keeping her secret work from him, fearing his rigid adherence to the law would prevent him from understanding. Of Bennett hiding his investigation for similar reasons. Of all the people who had judged him too inflexible, too bound by rules and regulations to see the larger picture. Perhaps they had been right. Perhaps he had been too unyielding in his youth and middle years. But age had a way of softening hard edges of teaching through loss what couldn't be learned through success. It wasn't too late to change, to become the man Martha had always believed he could be. With that thought, Jed finally allowed himself to rest, sleeping more soundly than he had in years. They reached Redemption by mid-afternoon the following day. The town looked unchanged, its citizens going about their business with no awareness of the events that had transpired at Blackwater Creek. No awareness that a corrupt judge and his human trafficking operation had been brought down, or that their own sheriff had been secretly working to make it happen. Their first stop was the doctor's office, where they found Bennett recovering from his gunshot wound. The young sheriff sat propped up in bed, his arm in a sling, his face pale but alert. He brightened visibly when Jed and Abigail entered. "You're back," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Harrison." "In custody," Jed confirmed, "being taken to the territorial capital for trial." Bennett nodded satisfaction, briefly replacing the pain in his expression. "Good, that's good." Dr. Williams, a portly man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression, hovered nearby. "Sheriff Bennett needs rest," he admonished. "The bullet missed anything vital, but he lost a good deal of blood." "Just a few minutes, Doc," Bennett pleaded. "I need to know what happened." Williams sighed but retreated to his office, leaving them to talk. Jed recounted the events at Fort Collins, while Abigail sat quietly by the window watching the street outside. When he finished, Bennett shook his head in wonder. "I can't believe we actually pulled it off," he said. "There were times I thought—" He trailed off, then looked directly at Jed. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you what I was doing. I should have trusted you." "No," Jed said. "You made the right call. I wasn't in a place to help back then, too caught up in my own grief." Still, Bennett shifted uncomfortably. "You were my mentor. Everything I know about being a lawman I learned from you." "Not everything," Jed countered. "You figured out some important lessons on your own, like when to bend the rules for the greater good." A ghost of a smile touched Bennett's lips. "Never thought I'd hear Jedediah Caldwell say those words." "People change," Jed said simply. Their conversation was interrupted by the doctor's return. "That's enough," Williams insisted. "Sheriff needs his rest if he's going to heal properly." As they prepared to leave, Bennett caught Jed's sleeve. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice lowered. "With everything that's happened, the town's going to need leadership while I recover." Jed understood the unspoken question. "Don't worry about that now. Focus on healing. The town will manage." Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Redemption's main street. Jed and Abigail walked in companionable silence toward the law office, where Jed hoped to find Luther Coleman. "Sheriff Bennett seems concerned about the town," Abigail observed. "He's a good lawman," Jed replied. "Cares about the people here." "He looks up to you, it's obvious." Jed made a non-committal sound. "He's made his own way, but he values your opinion." Abigail glanced sideways at him. "He was asking if you'd step in while he recovers, wasn't he?" Jed's stride faltered slightly. "What makes you say that?" "The way he looked at you, the way he asked about leadership." She shrugged. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. Jed hadn't considered the possibility, but now that Abigail mentioned it, Bennett's question did seem like an invitation. The idea of pinning on a badge again, even temporarily, stirred mixed emotions. After 10 years of deliberate isolation, was he ready to step back into a role of public responsibility? "It's not my place anymore," he said finally. "Town's changed. I've changed." "Maybe that's exactly why it should be your place," Abigail suggested. "You've seen both sides now, upheld the law and stood against corruption. That kind of perspective has value." Before Jed could respond, they reached Coleman's office. The elderly lawyer was at his desk as usual, surrounded by stacks of documents. His face broke into a smile when he saw them. "Jedediah, Miss Warren, you are both alive. Praise the Lord." He rose shakily to his feet. "I've been hearing all sorts of rumors. A fire at Blackwater Creek. Federal marshals riding through town. Tell me everything." As Jed recounted their experiences, Coleman listened with growing amazement, occasionally interjecting with questions or expressions of disbelief. When Jed mentioned Martha's journal and its role in Harrison's arrest, the old lawyer's eyes misted over. "Martha would be proud," he said softly. "So very proud." Jed nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "And what of you, Miss Warren?" Coleman turned to Abigail. "What are your plans now that this ordeal is behind you?" "I'll need to testify at the trial," she replied. "After that," she glanced at Jed, "I'm considering my options." Coleman followed her gaze, a knowing look crossing his weathered features. "Well, redemption could certainly use someone with medical training. Our good Dr. Williams isn't getting any younger, and he's been asking the town council for an assistant for years." "That's good to know," Abigail said carefully. A commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices and the sound of running feet carried through the open window. Coleman moved to look out, his expression changing to one of alarm. "There's a crowd gathering at the telegraph office," he reported. "Something's happened." Jed joined him at the window. A growing group of townspeople clustered around the telegraph office, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and anger. More people hurried to join them as news spread. "Stay here," Jed told Abigail and Coleman. "I'll find out what's going on." Outside, the crowd had swelled to several dozen people. Jed recognized faces from around town. The blacksmith, the general store owner, several ranchers from outlying properties. All wore expressions of disbelief or outrage. Jed approached Jonas Whitfield, the telegraph operator, who stood on the office steps trying to calm the gathering. "What's happened, Jonas?" Jed asked. Whitfield looked relieved to see him. "Jed, thank goodness. Maybe you can help make sense of this." He held up a telegram. "Just came through from the territorial capital. Judge Harrison's been released." Released? Jed felt as if he'd been struck. "That's not possible. He was arrested less than 2 days ago." According to this, he was released on his own recognizance after intervention from the territorial governor himself. Whitfield's voice dropped. "There's more. The governor's appointed an independent investigation into the allegations. Meanwhile, Harrison is free to resume his duties." The news hit Jed like a physical blow. All their efforts, the risks they'd taken, the lives lost, and Harrison had simply walked free, protected by his powerful connections. "Let me see that," Jed demanded, taking the telegram. The words confirmed Whitfield's account. Harrison had indeed been released with the governor's personal assurance of his sterling character and unimpeachable integrity. "What does this mean, Jed?" someone called from the crowd. "Is it true what they're saying about the judge, about women being sold?" Jed looked up to find dozens of eyes fixed on him, waiting for answers. These were people he'd protected for over 2 decades as sheriff, people who still looked to him for guidance despite his years of self-imposed isolation. "It means," he said slowly, "that the system doesn't always work the way it should." A murmur ran through the crowd. Jed continued, his voice gaining strength. "Judge Harrison has been running a human trafficking operation throughout the territory. Young women kidnapped, imprisoned, and sold to the highest bidder. I've seen it with my own eyes. Sheriff Bennett was injured trying to stop it, and now the governor's protecting Harrison." The crowd's reaction was immediate and vocal. Shouts of anger and disbelief rose from all sides. "That can't be true. The governor wouldn't protect a slave trader. Where's our sheriff? What's he doing about this?" Jed raised his hands, calling for silence. "Bennett was shot while helping federal marshals raid Harrison's operation. He's recovering at the doctor's office." This news caused another wave of exclamations. Jed waited for the noise to subside before continuing. "I understand you're shocked. I understand you want answers. But gathering in the street and shouting won't solve anything. What will then challenge Thomas Mercer, a cattle rancher with land bordering Silverwood? If the governor's involved, who can we turn to? Ikio. It was a valid question. If corruption reached all the way to the territorial capital, what recourse did ordinary citizens have? The federal authorities are involved now, Jed explained. Marshal Lawrence has evidence, including a detailed journal kept by my late wife documenting Harrison's crimes and the officials he bribed. This revelation caused a stir, particularly among those who had known Martha. Martha was helping girls escape from Harrison's operation. Jed continued, she was killed for it 5 years ago, made to look like natural causes. The crowd fell silent, absorbing this information. Martha had been well loved in Redemption, her funeral attended by nearly the entire town. The idea that she had been murdered and that her killer had walked free for 5 years struck a deep chord. What can we do, Jed? Asked Sarah Miller, who ran the town's small hotel. We can't just stand by while this happens. Jed looked at the faces around him, ordinary people confronted with extraordinary evil. What could they do against the power of a corrupt judge and governor? Then he remembered Abigail's words from the night before justice, is what ordinary people fight for even when the odds are against them. We can stand together, he said finally. We can make it clear that Redemption won't tolerate this kind of corruption. We can support Bennett in the federal investigation, and we can protect any victims who come forward. His words seemed to resonate with the crowd. Nods of agreement replaced expressions of helpless anger. But first, Jed added, we need to prepare. Harrison won't take this challenge lightly. He'll send men to silence witnesses and destroy evidence, and they could arrive any day. What do you suggest? Whitfield asked. Jed found himself falling back into the role he'd abandoned a decade ago, the leader, the protector, the voice of authority. Form a town committee, establish regular patrols, identify safe houses for witnesses. He spoke with growing confidence. And send telegrams to neighboring settlements. They need to know what's happening here. As he outlined his plan, Jed noticed Luther Coleman and Abigail watching from the doorway of the law office. Coleman nodded approvingly, while Abigail's expression showed a mixture of concern and admiration. When the crowd finally dispersed, each person charged with specific tasks, Jed rejoined them, feeling both exhilarated and exhausted by the unexpected turn of events. That was quite a speech, Coleman observed, almost like old times. Not by choice, Jed replied. What else could I do? You could have walked away, Abigail said quietly. Gone back to your ranch. Let someone else handle it. No. Jed shook his head. I couldn't. Not anymore. Coleman placed a gnarled hand on Jed's shoulder. The town needs leadership, Jed, especially now. Bennett's the sheriff. Bennett's lying in a sickbed with a bullet hole in his shoulder, Coleman countered. And even if he weren't, this is bigger than one man can handle. Jed sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on him once more. It was a familiar burden, one he had carried for over 20 years before setting it down. He'd hoped those days were behind him, but perhaps this was where he was meant to be. Perhaps this was what Martha had seen in him all along, not just the rigid lawman, but the man who would stand against injustice when it mattered most. I'll talk to Bennett, he conceded. See what he wants to do. Coleman nodded satisfied. Good. In the meantime, I'll draft some letters to contacts I have in Washington. The territorial governor may be corrupt, but federal authorities higher up might take interest. As they parted ways, Abigail fell into step beside Jed. You're going to do it, aren't you? Take up the badge again. Temporarily, Jed clarified. Just until Bennett recovers. Of course. Her tone suggested she believed otherwise. Just temporary. Jed shot her a sidelong glance. You don't think I should? I didn't say that. She considered it for a moment. Actually, I think you'd be good at it. The town obviously respects you. And you have perspective now. Experience on both sides of the law. They walked in silence for a few steps before she added, but I worry about what it might cost you to go back to that life after everything that's happened. Her concern touched him more deeply than he expected. I appreciate that, Miss Warren, but some costs are worth paying. Abigail, she corrected gently. After everything we've been through, I think you can call me Abigail. Jed nodded, a small smile touching his lips. Abigail, then. Bennett's reaction to the news of Harrison's release was predictably explosive, tempered only by his weakened condition and Dr. Williams's stern warnings about raising his blood pressure. It's outrageous, he fumed, attempting to sit up straighter in bed. After everything we've done, all the evidence we've gathered, how can the governor just dismiss it? Power protects power, Jed replied simply. Always has. Always will. So what now? We just give up. Let Harrison rebuild his operation somewhere else. No, Jed's voice was firm. We fight, but we do it smart. We gather more evidence, find more witnesses, build a case even the governor can't ignore. Bennett studied him with newfound respect. You've changed, Jed. The man I knew 10 years ago would have insisted we follow proper channels, wait for the system to work. The man you knew 10 years ago was a fool in some ways, Jed admitted. Thought the law was always just that, following the rules was enough. And now I know better. Jed settled into the chair beside Bennett's bed. The town's organizing, setting up patrols, establishing safe houses. They're ready to stand against Harrison if he sends men here. Bennett nodded approvingly. Good, that's good, but they'll need leadership. He held Jed's gaze. They'll need you. The moment had come, the question Jed had been anticipating since their conversation began. I'm not the sheriff anymore, Max. No, but you could be acting sheriff while I recover. Bennett's expression was earnest. There's no one else I'd trust with the job. Jed was silent for a long moment, weighing the request against his own reluctance to re-enter public life. Finally, he nodded once. All right, until you're back on your feet. Relief washed over Bennett's face. Thank you, my badge is in the drawer there. He gestured to the bedside table. It's yours for now. Jed opened the drawer and removed the silver star. Its weight was familiar in his palm, though it had been a decade since he'd worn one like it. He didn't pin it on immediately, instead slipping it into his pocket. There's something else you should know, Bennett said, his voice lowering. Before all this happened with Voss in the warehouse fire, I received information about unusual activity at the old Miller property, about 15 miles southwest of town. What kind of activity? Riders coming and going at odd hours, supplies being delivered. Someone's using the place, but it's supposed to be abandoned since old man Miller died last year. Jed frowned. You think it's connected to Harrison? I don't know, but given what we now know about his operation, Bennett left the implication hanging. I'll look into it, Jed promised. Get some rest now. Doctor's orders. As he rose to leave, Bennett caught his arm. Be careful, Jed. Harrison's network is extensive, and now that he knows we're on to him, he'll be desperate. I've faced desperate men before. Not like Harrison, Bennett warned. He has everything to lose now. That makes him more dangerous than Voss ever was. Jed nodded, acknowledging the risk. I'll keep that in mind. Outside the doctor's office, Jed found Abigail waiting, her expression troubled. You heard? He asked, knowing she must have been listening through the open door. I heard. She fell into step beside him as they walked toward the sheriff's office. So you're the law and redemption again. Jed patted his pocket where the badge rested. Temporarily. And you're going to investigate this Miller property. First thing tomorrow. He glanced at her. You should stay in town. It could be dangerous. Abigail's chin lifted slightly. I've faced Harrison's men before. I'm coming with you. It's not your responsibility. Isn't it? Her voice took on an edge. Those women, if there are women being held there, they're in that situation because of my father. That makes it very much my responsibility. Jed recognized the determination in her eyes, the same determination he had seen when she'd stepped onto his porch to surrender herself to Voss rather than endanger him. All right, he conceded. But you follow my lead. No unnecessary risks. Agreed. Her expression softened slightly. Thank you for not treating me like someone who needs protection. After what you've been through, that would be foolish. Jed's respect for her resilience had only grown over their time together. But that doesn't mean I won't worry. A small smile touched her lips. Fair enough. They reached the sheriff's office, a modest building with a small jail attached to the rear. Jed hesitated before the door, memories washing over him. How many times had he entered this building during his 22 years as sheriff? How many decisions had he made within these walls? Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The interior was much as he remembered it, a desk, a gun rack, now empty. Its contents presumably secured elsewhere during Bennett's absence. A wood stove in the corner and a row of wanted posters on the wall. Feels strange, he admitted, moving to the desk and running his fingers over its scarred surface. Being back here. Good strange or bad strange? Abigail asked, remaining near the doorway. Both, I suppose. He opened the top drawer, finding it organized much as he had kept it, paper pencils, a leather-bound ledger for recording incidents. Bennett learned his habits from me. He respects you a great deal. Jed nodded absently, continuing his inspection of the office. Everything was in good order, testament to Bennett's conscientiousness. The cells in back were empty, the keys hanging on their hook beside the door. Finally, Jed removed the badge from his pocket and studied it in the fading afternoon light. The silver star caught the sun's rays, gleaming despite the scratches that marked its surface. With a deliberate motion, he pinned it to his vest. The familiar weight settled against his chest, both burden and responsibility. Acting Sheriff Caldwell, Abigail said, testing the title. It suits you. Before Jed could respond, the door burst open behind her. Jonas Whitfield stood in the doorway, breathless from running. Jed, thank God you're here. The telegraph operator's face was pale with alarm. Just got word from Fort Collins. Harrison's on the move, headed this way, with at least a dozen armed men. Jed straightened, instantly alert. When left Fort Collins yesterday morning, according to my source. They could be here by tomorrow. Did your source say why they're coming? Abigail asked, though the answer seemed obvious. Whitfield nodded grimly. Word is Harrison's been making threats. Said he's going to make an example of redemption. Show what happens to towns that defy him. Jed absorbed this information with outward calm, though his mind was racing through implications and possibilities. How many men can we muster on short notice? Maybe 20. Whitfield estimated. Most of the ranchers have gone back to their properties, but the townsmen will stand. 20 against 12, Abigail murmured. Not terrible odds. Except Harrison's men will be hired guns, Jed pointed out. Experienced killers. Our people are shopkeepers and farmers mostly. So what do we do? Whitfield asked, looking to Jed for direction. Jed moved to the window, gazing out at the town he had protected for so many years. Ordinary people going about their lives, unaware of the danger approaching. Families who would be caught in the crossfire if Harrison brought his war to their streets. He couldn't allow that to happen. Jonas, I need you to send telegrams to every settlement within a day's ride. Tell them what's happening here. Ask for help if they can spare it. He turned back to face them. Then start organizing the town. Get the women and children to the church basement. It's the sturdiest building we have. Any man willing to fight should meet here in 1 hour. And what about you? Abigail asked as Whitfield hurried away to carry out his instructions. Jed's expression was resolute. I'm going to meet Harrison before he reaches town. Try to end this without bloodshed. That's suicide, she protested. He'll kill you on sight. Maybe. Jed checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded. But I won't let redemption become a battlefield. Too many innocent people would be hurt. Then I'm coming with you. No. His tone brooked no argument. You're staying here. If something happens to me, they'll need someone who knows what Harrison is capable of. Someone who can testify against him if it comes to that. Abigail's eyes flashed with frustration. This is exactly what he wants. To isolate his enemies, pick them off one by one. I know. Jed's voice softened. But sometimes the only way to protect many lives is to risk one. She stepped closer, her expression fierce. There has to be another way. We can set an ambush, use the terrain to our advantage, and risk civilian casualties, no. Jed shook his head firmly. I've seen what happens when battles spill into towns. I won't let that happen to redemption. Abigail studied him for a long moment, recognizing the immovable resolve in his stance. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. When will you go? First light tomorrow. Try to intercept them at Cypress Ridge. It's a natural choke point on the main road. And if they don't come that way, they will. Jed spoke with certainty. Harrison will want to make an entrance. Arrive in force down the main street. Maximum intimidation. Abigail didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue further. What do you need me to do? Help organize the town defenses. Work with Luther. He knows every building in Redemption where the strengths and weaknesses are. Jed hesitated, then added, and look after Bennett. He'll try to join the fight if he hears what's happening, injured or not. I will. She met his gaze steadily. But promise me something. If I can, don't try to be a hero. If you can't reason with Harrison, if the odds are too great, come back. We'll face him together." The genuine concern in her voice touched him deeply. How long had it been since anyone cared whether he lived or died? Since Martha, surely. 5 long years of isolation had made him forget what it felt like to matter to another person. "I promise," he said solemnly. "No heroics." She seemed satisfied with his answer, though worry still creased her brow. "I should go help Luther with the preparations." As she turned to leave, Jed called after her. "Abigail." She paused in the doorway. "Thank you for caring what happens to an old lawman who's far past his prime." A smile softened her features. "Not as past your prime as you think, Sheriff Caldwell. Not by a long shot." After she left, Jed sank into the chair behind the desk, his desk once more, at least temporarily. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than the badge on his chest. Tomorrow he would ride out to meet Judge Harrison, the man who had ordered Martha's murder, who had sold his own daughter into captivity, who had corrupted the very system of justice he was sworn to uphold. Jed had no illusions about his chances. Harrison wouldn't come to negotiate or surrender. He would come for blood to silence the witnesses against him and crush the resistance before it could spread. But Jedediah Caldwell had faced long odds before. In the war as a young sheriff in a lawless territory during the bank robbery that had claimed Timothy Voss's life. Each time he had done what needed doing regardless of the personal cost. Tomorrow would be no different. As the sun began to set over redemption, casting long shadows across the town he had sworn once more to protect, Jed opened the bottom drawer of the desk. There, as he had expected, was a bottle of whiskey, Bennett maintaining another tradition from Jed's tenure. He poured a small measure into a dusty glass and raised it in silent toast to the empty room. To Martha, whose courage had started him on this path. To Bennett, who had carried on the work of justice despite overwhelming odds. To Abigail, whose resilience inspired him to be better than he thought possible. And perhaps a little to himself, the man he had been, the man he had become, and the man he might yet be if he survived the coming confrontation. The whiskey burned pleasantly as he swallowed, warming him from within against the chill of uncertainty. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now there was work to be done, a town to prepare, men to organize, a strategy to develop. Jedediah Caldwell, acting sheriff of redemption, rose from his desk and went to meet whatever fate awaited him, with his head held high and his purpose clear. Some battles were worth fighting, even when victory seemed impossible. Some principles were worth defending, even at the cost of one's life. Some debts of honor, of justice, of love, could only be paid in full measure. This was the price of redemption, and Jed was finally ready to pay it.